Hello and welcome to another interview. We've got Carter McLean with us, one of my favorite drummers, and we are very lucky to have him here play for us and also have a chat with us. So, how are you?
Thanks for having me, man. I'm good.
¿Qué tal?
I'm good. Así, así.
See, how was you got here yesterday?
Yeah, yesterday morning we took a red eye, so I was up for 2 days straight, and then went out, stayed up late to kind of get on schedule. Went out for dinner, walked around town, which is beautiful. Zamora is amazing, and then I feel good now. I feel rested. I feel like I can actually focus.
Looking forward to your clinic?
Yeah,
Yourself?
yeah.
Excited?
I love teaching in that kind of a format where you can really just explain things very clearly, and it's very straight ahead. So
Not nervous?
no, I don't really get nervous for these things. It's more fun, just to interact with people.
What do you get nervous for?
Man, I don't know. Not a lot. I don't really get nervous a lot. It's a good question. Not very much. I don't have an answer. Yeah. I try to keep it very tranquilo.
I guess that's the right answer.
Yeah, I mean, I've been playing since I was 9, so this is like, I'm probably more comfortable behind a drum set than doing anything else. So, and it's a lot of it is headset, when the headspace you're in when you sit down at these things, there's so many great drummers playing. It's easy to get like, oh, well, I can't do what they're doing, or maybe I should play to a track, and I let go of that a long time ago and just said, if people are into what I'm doing, they'll come and watch. And if they're not going to come, and that's fine. They're there to see whatever you're going to do. So that's why I don't really get nervous, because it's whatever I do normally.
Has it always been like that? Or do you come to that conclusion at some point?
Yeah, I mean, I started doing clinics when I was really young. I think the first one I did, I was like 18. And I actually had a video of it, which is really funny because, I was playing a bunch of like kind of fusion-y stuff with a band I was playing in back then with my brother, which is kind of like Steely Dan, but really like kind of complicated stuff, a lot of drumming going on. Still groove stuff, but like a lot of notes. And then I soloed and did a bunch of stuff. It was at a Guitar Center, like a music store in the U.S. And there's a lot of people there. And after I kind of finished explaining some stuff, I said, "Are there any questions?" And everybody, was like this. And my first response was, I said it out loud. I said, "What are you all, professionals?" I kind of, because I was a kid, I got kind of like flustered and I didn't know what to do. And so I took note that when I saw that video, I was like, never say that again. I was like, you can't do that. So after that, I just learned like, it's about you expressing what your perspective is on the instrument. And if people do have questions at the end on tuning or stickings or ideas, then they can ask them at the end. And if not, we're already done, so it's easy, because it's easy to do a solo and then stop and have 45 minutes left and go, now what? So you have to have a lot of things you want to be able to talk about. But luckily, it's something I've done for so long, I could talk for 5 hours straight. So an hour is quick.
Right, it goes by
so
very
I don't
fast.
get nervous. An hour goes, usually like I did the UK drum show 6 months ago, and it's a big festival, and you have an hour. And I had all these topics ready to go, and I thought I had it timed out. I got to 2 of them out of like 5 or 6, and they were like, you have 5 minutes. And it was over. So it goes by really quickly. So
the topics that you will run through today, are the 3 left on the UK Drum Show?
no,
are they renewed?
I usually just go out and play. Because if I go out and start teaching something immediately, I don't end up playing, because you just get so deep into stuff. And then people ask a question and it makes a big left turn, and it's easy to get off track very easily. And I tend to do that. Like I'll think of something and it'll lead to something else, and then you get on these tangents. So today I'm going to talk about groove first and foremost, like what is a groove, what makes a groove feel good, how to improve it, and then how your hand technique kind of correlates with that. There's kind of 2 faders I look at. You have technique and you have like ideas and musicality, right? And a lot of people have technique, like up here these days. People have usually really good technique, but then they don't really have a lot of ideas. It's just all technique stuff, a lot of notes. Or they have amazing ideas, but they have no technique. So the ideal thing is to have both of those at a high level, and then you can really express yourself, So I want to kind of show you have to have both sides of the coin, not just one. And it's not really about technique. It's just technique is like your vocabulary. Like if you only know a few words, you're not going to be able to have a very interesting conversation with somebody. But if you have a huge vocabulary, you can go anywhere, you know. So that's what I'm going to try to talk about, I think. But it could go anywhere. Who knows?
I'm looking forward to it.
It'll be fun.
Talking about questions, I've got a question written out, like word by word. That's the only one I have.
Yeah.
And what is one aspect of your drumming that you feel that doesn't get talked about or you don't get asked about it enough?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think I've been asked that one. That I don't think it's been asked about enough. Probably like the dynamic range. That to me is the most important thing basically on the drums, because you don't have key centers, you don't have chord changes you're playing, you have loud and soft and slow and fast and combinations of those things. Most people are just fast, loud 90% of the time. But when you take all of that away and allow there to be space, right? That's the most interesting stuff to me, where you can like kind of hear the space between ideas instead of just all of these notes that are just bombarding you. So probably maybe just dynamics, because a lot of people focus on hand technique or, you know, feel, like people tend to like the grooves or whatever that I play. But to me, which is all great. I mean, I love all of that stuff, obviously, but dynamics is a big thing, I think, that's overlooked, especially on this instrument.
About something that you get asked probably too much?
Oh, like I was saying earlier, just like people asking me, like, what weight is your bottom hi-hat cymbal? Like, what note is your front bass drum head? Like, what beater on your kick drum pedal are you? It's like, it's fun to talk about gear to a point, but once it gets down to that kind of thing, it's kind of irrelevant. And whatever works for me might not work for that person. I've done that a lot and said, okay, this is how I tune the top note. This is the bottom note. These are the heads I use. And then they do it and they say, oh, I don't like the way that sounds at all. So that's what I like to play on. Doesn't mean it's, you know, it's like food. Like I might like pepperoni pizza. You might hate pepperoni pizza, you know, great to me, but it doesn't mean it's the right thing for you. So all of that stuff, same thing with cymbals. I have a bunch of usually very thin cymbals because I have a lighter touch. You have to know how to play them. You know, if you just go wailing on them, they're not going to sound the same. So a lot of people say, what's the weight of that, you know, whatever, 20-inch 30th anniversary ride you have? And I'll tell them, and they'll go find one, and then they'll play it. They're like, oh, it's too washy for me. And I'm like, well, that's the cymbal, and you play heavier than I do, so it's going to sound different, you know? So a lot of that stuff gets to be just too much.
I've got the same rack as you're using today. It doesn't make me sound like you.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. You could put any drummer here on anyone else's kit. Even, I mean, basically every other kit I've heard sounds the opposite of my kit. Mine's like wide open, tuned high, kind of jazz, like funky kind of sound. Everything else in there is like doo, 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 like pretty dead. But I would still sound like me playing on those drums. I would probably play in a different approach for what's appropriate for that sound. And probably vice versa. Maybe if Stan played on my kit, he would start to play some different stuff, which is...
That'd be fun, though.
Yeah, I like... And that's why I tend to switch my setups a lot, like every week at home, because of that. It inspires you to approach the instrument in a different way. A lot of people just set up a drum set for 10 years, and it doesn't change, you know?
How much do you like to tinker?
To tinker?
Yeah.
A lot. I mean, if you walked into my studio right now, there are drums everywhere, cymbals everywhere. Like there might be a WFL bass drum, like a 24 by 14 from the 30s, like huge wide open sound. Then there might be a 20 with a pillow in it, or a 22. I mean, I'm constantly mixing and matching stuff because, like I was saying, it really does inspire you to play. If you play a little 16-inch bass drum that's wide open with a tiny piccolo snare cranked in one flat ride, that's a vibe, you know? And then if you put, you know, 10, 12, 13, 14, 16 with all the cymbals and dead bass drum and two snares, then you're going to start playing. I immediately think of like Manu Katché, like Peter Gabriel or something, like pop stuff. So it pushes you. And I think it's important for people to do that. Even if you only have like one drum set, take all the toms off, tune the snare drum differently, take the pillow and everything out of your bass drum, change the head, like try to get as much as you can out of what you have. You don't need to have a million drums, you know, it's just being, you know, inquisitive, just kind of being curious about what can I do with this? I think it's important. I think people get kind of just set with one sound and that's all they do, you know? And, you know, like think about a keyboard player these days. They have like whatever, a Nord or something. You can hit a button for 3 weeks and just have different sounds all day. Like I have this Arturia keyboard I've been using a lot. And the sound banks that these things have are incredible. I mean, just the acoustic pianos, there's probably 50 of them. And each one of them are amazing. It's like Japanese grand piano in hall. And it's like Bosendorfer in, you know, quiet practice room or something. I mean, it's really incredible. So you think about how many options those, you know, instruments have, and you look at drums and it's like, all right, well, how do we keep up with all of that? You know, so it's just trying stuff out.
I guess that thing of just pressing a button and you change the settings on a keyboard has inspired somehow to how we think about drum kits, or at least how producers think about drum kits.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like, yeah, especially for programming and stuff. That's which is so much of the drum world now. I mean, it's rare to hear like an acoustic sounding kit on a record, on any record, whether it's a songwriter, pop tune. I mean, pop stuff, it's almost all programmed. And they might drop in like an actual fill from a drum for fun. And then it's back to the program, you know? Like Aaron Sterling does a lot of that stuff. He's an amazing player. He's down in Nashville. Like he does a ton of tracking, and he'll play like a whole tune, and then you know sometimes they'll put programming on top of it and mix and match, or they're like, oh, we're only going to use your kick and snare for the chorus or something. You know, it's up to the producer. You know, but I still just like having natural drums through a whole tune. Obviously, the programming thing, it's not my wheelhouse at all.
How do you feel about music these days?
Oh, that's a big question. These days, I would say I'm more disappointed than not. Like I'll try to do the radio and just like scroll through, or even like Spotify or Tidal or like these streaming services. They'll have like what's, you know, new songs released this week. And I'll go through that stuff because it's usually like whatever, Beyonce or whatever the pop stuff is. I just can't get into it. I try. I mean, I'm I listen to a lot of different kind of music, but most of the music I listen to, I'm going to say is like 80s and earlier, and really like 50s, 60s, 50s and 60s is like probably my favorite because I listen to a lot of straight ahead jazz. So like a lot of the old Blue Note records, a lot of the old Impulse records with Elvin and Max and all of that stuff. That's mostly what I listen to. There's some new songwriters I really like Phoebe Bridgers is really great. I mean, like I just saw the Killers the other night. Ronnie's a friend of mine, and like those guys are incredible at what they do. I mean, the show they put on and the amount of pop like hits those guys have written, it's pretty amazing. I mean, the whole night was like, oh my God, that's and like every song was like a huge hit. So that stuff's great, but in general, the new stuff I hear, I'm like, it's just, I guess I'm just like the old guy now. It's like, I feel like, I'm like, I don't know what they're saying. There's no melody. There's no song structure. It just sounds like someone talking over an MPC or something with like a synth patch. That to me is not music. That's like an advertisement for like Coca-Cola or something. But look, there's like, you know, there's a guy, Foy Vance, who's an amazing singer. I mean, when you hear and see people like that, that's like real deal stuff. But in general, the like mass music scene is fairly depressing, let's say. But the good thing is there's all the old stuff. You can go put on an old Ray Charles record and it's right there. You can listen to that versus whatever this new stuff is. You know, that's just me. I'm sure a lot of people love, you know, all this new stuff. They're obviously selling records.
From what I've seen, you've made it a purpose to listen to music. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a big thing I talk about is like actively listening, not just hearing. Like I can hear that snare drum in the background, but I'm not listening to it. You know what I mean? It's the same thing with music. People put on music. Oh, I listen to music all day. And I do this with students. I'm like, all right, what was your favorite record in the last week or last month? And oh, there's so many I can't pick. I'm like, well, just pick one. And they can't. And that's another thing that I think has to do with how much we're bombarded on a daily basis with social media and YouTube and everything. It's like there's just a never ending. You could just hit next on the songs and never actually listen to like an entire song, let alone a record, like an album, and know every note and everything that's happening on that record is so important, because that's how I learned how to play. And that's what I still do. Usually every morning, I have like a hi-fi system in our living room, and I make a cup of coffee and put on a vinyl record and sit with nothing else going on and listen to the entire record and really just sit there and listen. I don't have my phone on. Everything's off. Usually my dog is sitting with me. And I'll do that with a record or maybe 3 or 4 records, depending on what's going on that day. And that to me is better time spent than sitting doing paradiddles all day. Because at the end of the day, when you're playing with people, nobody cares what your technique or what inverted ratomacues you're doing. They're like, does this feel good? Are you listening to what I'm doing? You know, that's one of the biggest thing I learned with playing with Charlie Hunter, because it was just the two of us. It was like this. You know, he has his guitar, I have my drums, and we're like this the whole time, like really vibing on each other. And it's amazing because you can make these immediate left-hand turns very quickly because it's just one other person. There's no like bass player you have to deal with. It's just immediate. And that's some of the most fun I've ever had playing. But that's all about listening. Neither of us are like, oh, check out this cool technique I'm doing. Like, it doesn't. And meanwhile, Charlie's playing bass and guitar at the same time. He's playing bass, chords, and soloing. And it's like, I just kind of have to like put that aside and like let my mind not be blown away by that while we're playing and just listen, you know? But yeah, I mean, I say that all the time. Listening is probably the most important thing. And I think it's overlooked. It's the most overlooked chop, right? Because everyone wants chops and, oh, I can do this between my feet and I can do this and I can play 9/8 with my left foot and do, but it's like.
But you also want to get better at musicality, as you said.
Yeah, I just want to play music with other people. You know, that's why it's fun to like, when I go out and play, I'm not going out and playing licks. Like some people tend to ask me like, oh, what was that lick? Like on a YouTube video at 3 minutes and 38 seconds. And I'll go watch. I'll
solo over.
Well, I'll go look at it and go, yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing. Because it's not a lick that I've like memorized. And I'm going to talk about that today, about having your technique to a point where you can speak very freely. So if I have an idea, I can get it out, but it's not a preconceived sticking, if that makes sense. You know, really any sticking is going to come down between right, left or right, right, left, left. It's just a combination of those two things. So
at the end of the day, we obviously know how to talk or how to speak a language. We don't know like the semantics and all the language.
Yeah.
But we still speak it.
Yeah. I mean, that's the natural, that's where I would love people to get, where they're thinking about just speaking. Because, you know, I'll say like, you know, when I'll have somebody come up and play a solo, like maybe I'll do that today. I'll have someone come up and play, to say like, play me something, play a solo, like tell a story on the drums. And on the drums in particular, that freaks people out. Because anyone that usually goes, they go boom, ba, ba-ga-da-doom, ba, doom, da-ga-doo-ga, ba-ga-doo-ga, da-ga-doo-ga, da-ga-doo-ga, boom. But it's just like beats. But I'm like, okay, that's cool. But like maybe try to tell a story on the drums that's not in time, right? And as soon as you say, I don't want to hear you play time, people freak out, right? Because, like, you know, if you're playing like I just did this record that came out a couple months ago where I have like a woodwind player and strings, and I played piano and guitar, and I had my friend play bass clarinet, which is a beautiful instrument, and he came in and played some parts that I had written out, just long notes, and that was more interesting to me than any drum parts or anything I was doing on the record, just because it's a beautiful sound. So like trying to think of the drums, like, well, how can I make a sound like that? Maybe I'll use mallets on a floor tom and just do a really light roll and then move that around as like long tones. You know, people barely do that. It's all very staccato, choppy note stuff. So I think it's just also perspective, you know, of how you want to approach particularly the drum set. Because it's very, you know, it's groove stuff and it's all very pretty staccato. But like, take that groove and play it 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a whole different ball game when you slow everything down. It's really different, you know. So maybe I'll try to play slowly today.
I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned Charlie Hunter, and I wanted to ask you about how do you prepare mentally for different situations, such as playing with Charlie, playing Lion King, playing here today. I get that all that is quite different in a way.
Yeah, those are 3 really different things. Well, I would say the the strongest thing to keep in mind between any playing situation is listening, right? So we'll start with Charlie. So I've known Charlie for 24 years or something. I've known him a long time, but we only started playing maybe 7 years ago or something. He just called me up and one day and it's like, hey man, we should play. And I have this gig coming up. I think it was a New Year's gig at Irving Plaza. We were opening for Snarky Puppy. And he just said, hey, it's you and me, Curtis Falks on trombone, who I'm a huge fan. He played with Bill Frisell and he's played with Ron Miles. I mean, he's like an amazing musician. So I was like, that sounds amazing. And I wasn't nervous until I said, just send me whatever tunes you want me to learn. You know, we'll learn them and we can get together if you want or not. We'll just hit. I'm fine just going up and playing. And he's like, oh, no, that's boring. He goes, you know, we'll just play. And I go, what do you mean? He's like, you just follow me. You have good ears. He's like, we'll just play. We don't need to rehearse anything. I was like, okay. So I showed up. I used Snarky's bass drum. I brought a snare, a 22-inch 30th anniversary and 15-inch 30th anniversary hat. So it was kick, snare, hat, ride. That was it. Dead kick drum, which I normally don't use. That was kind of weird. And there's a video of it up on YouTube, and he's like looking at me the whole time, and I'm staring at him for breaks. I'm like, let me know if there's breaks or anything. And that whole, there were tunes of his. We hadn't rehearsed any of it. I had never met Curtis until that day. So that's a situation where your ears are just on. If your ears aren't on and you're not paying attention and you're just like trying to play drum licks, he will not call you. He'll probably ask you to get off stage. So that's, again, super intense listening. And also not a big drum set. So it's not like I'm playing licks. It's just groove. Yeah. Lion King is very different because there's a conductor leading you. So you have to have one eye on the conductor. You have to have an ear on a click track if there is a click. There's only like 6 tunes with a click. And then there's an entire orchestra that you're leading. So you're also, depending on who's conducting, sometimes the conductors don't have the most consistent time. And so you have to thread the needle of like keeping really good time for the orchestra because they're really just listening to you. They're not watching the conductor. But then playing the game of balancing, all right, I'm watching the conductor. I'm acknowledging that that's happening. I'm also acknowledging that they're dragging or rushing and they don't even know it, right? So if I went with every little thing they did, the groove would be like subtly kind of all over. It never feels settled. So that you're really listening to a lot at once and kind of checking in with everybody almost on like a millisecond level, if that makes sense. But again, it's listening. Yeah, like that's a bigger drum set and it's a much like more intricate kind of book that has to be note for note. Literally, like every note has to be played exactly the same way every night. There's no changes. And that's including accents, how loud the patterns are. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. And then, well, clinics like this, like just performing solo drums to me is the easiest because it's maybe the most exposed because it's just you. It's like if you make a mistake, it's very obvious. But I kind of feel like at this point, it's not really mistakes. It's more just like choices of like, do I want to show that I have really great technique or do I care less about that and want to try to explain a different point of view? You know, because in an hour, it's hard to show everything you can cover, you know. And I'm not playing to tracks or anything. I'm just going to go out and play. And for these kind of things, it's more like, if people want to just see me play tunes, they can go on YouTube and see some videos. But when I'm here at a situation like this, I want to explain my perspective and talk with people and say, do you have questions? Because I could just go up and play a bunch of tunes, but I don't feel like that's going to help people understand where I'm coming from. You know,
right.
So again, it's listening in all these situations. Like, you know, when I go out and sit down today, I have no idea what I'm going to play. I'm just going to improvise. And you really have to be in the moment listening to what you're doing and making sure it makes sense. Is it translating to the audience? You know, the last thing you want to be thinking about is your technique, right? You want to just be listening to what's going out, you know? So yeah, listening. That's the common.
It sounds simple. But you've obviously done this for a lot, for how
every
many
day
years?
for a long time. Yeah, the thing I like about that is it is a simple concept. It's like listen, But it's a lot harder for people to do that than they think. You know, like I've done this a million times. I'll sing a drum beat to a student, like a very specific beat, and I'll say, play this exact beat that I'm singing to you, or I'll play it. And they go, oh, okay, got it. And it'll be like 70% right. And then they start messing around, or like they miss a bass drum or an open hi-hat thing, or the dynamics are completely different, you know. And it's a hard thing to really reproduce exactly what you're listening to, especially if it's something in your head and you want to get it out. It's very difficult to get exactly what you want out, because you might not have the right amount of instruments or sounds. Like Keith Jarrett's one of my favorite musicians, and I was listening to an interview of him about why he kind of grunts and moans in the background. A lot of his live recordings, you can hear him like almost like screaming. It's very distracting. And he finally said, it's because I'm playing as much as I can on the piano at that time with my 10 fingers, but there's other sounds I'm hearing that I can't get because I'm just limited by my hands and the instrument. And so I end up like making these noises to try to like let that out, which is pretty cool when you hear it explained that way. But when you hear him going like, like it's a little like distracting. But, you know, you can't argue with, I mean, his musicality is like from another planet, you know. But yeah, it all comes down to listening and really expressing yourself. You could have all the technique in the world and go up and play like a robot, and it's not really going to hit people the same way as if you went up and really were like honest with your performance. You know, and that's probably the only thing to get nervous about is like, you know, it's about like going out and really like being kind of naked, you know, that you can't really hide behind anything. I could go up and just play a bunch of pre-rehearsed things, but I don't feel like that's as fun. It's not as fun for me, especially. And I think the audience gets a better, more honest impression of you if you really just go out and play. So.
Are you big on authenticity?
Yeah. Oh, huge.
How do you make sure you're authentic throughout all the stuff you play?
Yeah, well, you just have to be honest. It comes down to being honest. Like people are like, "Oh, can you play this style, or can you play like this guy?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I probably could, but it's not me." And so, like, I don't try to play a bunch of ripping drum and bass stuff, or like I don't try to play metal stuff. Like just because it's not my wheelhouse, and there's so many other drummers I'd just rather listen. You know, like Mario from Gojira is like, I saw those guys play last year. And I was watching him from the side of the stage. You know that band at all? Yeah. I mean, that drummer, I had a whole new respect for that genre after I saw him live. It was incredible. I couldn't do one song like that. I mean, the stuff his feet were performing and his hands, all these polyrhythms but it worked with the music perfectly, and it drove that band. But I'm not going to go home and set up 2 bass drums and try to catch up to that guy. Like, that's never going to happen. I'd rather just hear him, you know. And I think he would probably have an equally hard time sitting down playing on a kit like mine with Charlie. He'd probably be like, whoa, this is what's happening, because it's so loose. It's very organic, whereas that music is like really structured and very written out. It's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I guess you have no other option other than being authentic, really, because you're just in your body and it's your fingerprint, you know? So whatever you play is going to be you, but you don't want to be, I see this a lot at clinics. People freak out and they start trying to play like some of the other people in the clinic. And it's like, you know, if David Garibaldi was on a clinic or something, I'm not going to go out and try to play all these like, you know, Tower of Power grooves. It's like, that's his thing, you know? Or if like Tane Watts is on one of these, I'm not going to go out and try to swing. It's like, that's what he does, and he's amazing at it. I'm going to just do what I hear in my head, and if people like it, cool. And if they don't, there's 10 other people they can listen to throughout the day, you know.
How do you choose what to listen out to or not to?
Music?
Or drumming in general? How do you pick what inspires you or what doesn't?
Oh, man, that changes every day. I mean, usually just by just the mood you're in when you wake up. Some mornings I'm going to put on James Brown all day because I'm just like, that's what I hear. Some days I just want to hear classical music. Some days I just want to hear solo piano music, or maybe I'll put on Mastodon and Gojira and get like super heavy. That's kind of just like, to me, it's like, what do you want to eat? You know, that's like the classic, like, what do you want to get for dinner? I don't know. What do you want to get to? It's like, it's whatever you feel like. Some nights you just want to make a really healthy salad. Some nights you want to make a steak. Some nights you just want to have a bunch of cheese and pizza. And I kind of see music as the same thing. They're just different flavors. And I kind of let the day dictate that, you know. And I definitely go through phases where I'll go super jazz for like a month or a few weeks and get like into Jack DeJohnette for like 2 weeks straight. Or I'll just let that go and listen to a bunch of pop stuff. There's nothing wrong with listening to just like simple pop music. I mean, it feels good. People obviously love that stuff. But I think the mood day to day changes. I don't think there's any way to know before you wake up like, oh, tomorrow's going to be a metal day. Yeah.
Tuesday for metal.
Yeah. Tuesday through Thursday's jazz. Friday, it just changes. And it could change throughout the day. You know, I could be like listening to Tom Waits in the morning and really into that. And then by the evening, I'm listening to like, you know, Japanese house or something, you know.
Like Japanese house. Yeah, amazing.
She's incredible. I mean, and I think she produces all of that stuff. And the sound, I was listening to that actually on the flight over when I was like trying to zone out. The sound is amazing.
Very flying music.
Yeah, and the drumming. You know Freddie Sheed?
Yeah.
He toured with her for a while, and I mean, Freddie's amazing. Shout out Freddie.
He's not very known here.
Oh man,
I've told a lot of people.
He's incredible. He's a really sweet guy too. But he was playing all those program parts on kit and pads and stuff, and I did a cover of one of her tunes that people really liked because people were like, "You should do like a pop cover or something." And I'm like, "All right." So I put up the toms and put duct tape on all my drums, and it's fun to do that, you know. But my reference for that kind of music is like Peter Gabriel, Paul Simon, Sting. Like those are the artists I wanted to play with when I was learning how to play. So that's usually my default reference, or like Gad or somebody, you know. But yeah.
Never played toms with any pop artists ever.
No toms?
No toms.
Kick snares?
Sometimes I thought tom.
Yeah.
Mostly as a iPod stand or...
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, it's like when I toured with Charlie, it was kick, snare, ride, hats. And then I remember I had a backline kit where they had like some toms, and I just left them up. And halfway through, I just kept looking at them, and they're like, hit me, hit me, hit me. And I'm like, I just ended up taking them off the stage because they were distracting. There was at no point where I was like, I want to go digga, 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 digga. It's just like, no. Just keep with the groove. If you're going to do a fill, just do it maybe on the snare or stop. That could be a fill, like a silence fill. You know, people usually don't think about like, oh, I'll do a fill where I play less. You know, that's a concept in itself. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, I could go out and play kick, snare, ride here and be equally as happy. It almost makes you focus more because you have less options. So you really have to get whatever you're going to get out of the snare. So
I remember I used to do blues jam session. I'm one of the drummers that was like a frequent guy to that one. Like, why don't you bring toms? I need them. I need to do my fills. I can do my fills.
Yeah. People want to hear that, like, you know, like, or you could just go ga 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 ga, or do it on the ride, you know. Yeah, I mean, especially with blues stuff. I mean, that's just like the classic, like snare 13, 16, 22. Let's shuffle or whatever, you know. But blues is also like that could be a lot of different feels. There's a lot of different kinds. You know, so when people say, "Oh, I did a blues jam," it's like sometimes it's like just a rock jam. You know, it's not like it's not a shuffly thing all night. It's like do that, and they're just playing blues over it. You know, but yeah, I mean, I think also that's just like a thing people at home should try. Is like if you have a bunch of drums or not, break it down for a month where it's kick, snare, hi-hat, no ride, no other cymbals, and just because that's really what you're playing 95% of the time. And if that stuff doesn't sound good and you can't have a wide base of grooves just on that, you should definitely take some steps back and look at that, you know. Because it's, you know, you get these huge drums and all you can just hit everything and it seems like you're doing stuff, but there's really no focus or concept. It's just you have a huge drum set and you're just hitting things. And I went through that when I was into Rush and all of that. I had the rototoms and the cowbells and double bass drum pedal that I used for like a day, and I put that away. I said, this is not for me.
You see yourself going back to that?
Never. No, I probably end up playing less bass drum the older I get. It's just more like intentional one hit things. I mean, sometimes I'll get into some doubles, but nothing like crazy. Like Stan's foot is insane. Have you seen his
Yeah, I've seen.
feet? I mean, his hands are insane too, but it's just like, oh my God. Certain people just have that stuff down. It's really impressive. I just don't hear things on that level.
Really?
It just freaks me out when I hear that much sound. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa.
I'm very interested by it. By the end of the day, it's like what I do, I don't hear 4 kicks in a row at that speed in my play.
And I couldn't do it even if they asked me to. I'd be like, yeah, call Stan. I'm not your guy. You know, that's another important thing is like know what your wheelhouse is. You know, if somebody calls me for a Latin big band gig, I'm going to be like, not your guy. Call my sub at Lion King. He'll crush that stuff, you know. But if somebody calls me for a pop gig or just a groove gig, or even I'll go do straight ahead gigs. You know, I have no problem doing that. But, you know what you can actually do. Don't show up and just completely dive bomb. You know, but another example is like Lion King. I had never seen a Broadway show in my life, let alone played one. And I ended up playing the biggest Broadway show in history. You know, so that was a complete, not an accident, but it was not on my radar at all. But technically, I could play all the parts. I went and watched the show, and I was like, okay, I can play all of this. Now it's just memorizing the show in my head. So I know every little cue, every crash, every bass drum roll, every shaker part. What mallet do I flip around to play this while I'm playing this with this triangle thing? That's the hardest part of a show like that, is the choreography of, it's not just boom, bop, boom, boom, bop for 2 hours. I mean, it's very written out, hand drum, wood blocks, drum set, 5 different implements. I mean, I have mallets, I have a second set of mallets, I have bundle sticks, I have drum sticks, and then I have a different set of blast sticks, and then a triangle and a shaker. That's just all on my stick stand. So, you know, I knew I could do it, but I had never played a show, but I knew I could pull it off. You know, it's different than hearing a style of music you're not familiar with at all, and then just trying to jump into it. That's usually doesn't work out very well.
I wanted to bring it back to Lion King, and right before that, you decided to quit drums for a while. Is that right?
Yeah, for like a year, I started a photography company.
What were the reasons to quit drums?
Similar to, I mean, I just went
photography.
through this a couple months ago, actually. I was talking to my wife. I was like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. You know, the music industry is hard. It's a hard business. It's the music business. I mean, people love music and like playing instruments, but when you want to make it your job, now it's a business, you know, and you have to promote yourself. You have to be professional. You have to be able to show up. I mean, being able to show up and play the gig is like the first 20%. Then everything else is like, you know, do you return emails quickly? Are you on time? Are you early? Do you make your flight? Like, do you deliver? Like, when you show up for the gig, is everything, there's so much stuff to it. And there's fewer and fewer gigs, I feel like, these days, and way less venues. Like I was saying to you earlier, like, you know, 55 Bar in New York City just closed. That was like a staple. Every night was like Mike Stern, Wayne Krantz, like, you know, Mark Giuliani used to play down there all the time. Keith would be down there all the time. That's where I first saw Keith Carlock play with Tim LaFave and Wayne. I would go down like every Thursday when they played and just watch. And that's gone now. It'll probably end up being like a coffee shop or an apartment or something. So I wanted to take a break and see if there's, because I've been doing this my whole life since I was a kid. I was like, maybe I'll do something else. And I started when I was traveling Europe, when I was touring, I bought a DSLR camera. And I said, you know, I want to learn how to shoot with a real camera, like auto, on manual. So I'm like adjusting the ISO, everything. And I started taking photos, and then I came home and I started showing them to people, and they're like, man, these are really cool photos. And I was getting really excited about a new hobby. And then I like entered a couple into a photo competition for the Smithsonian Institute had this photo competition, and it was free. So I entered into, and both of them made the top 3. So I didn't come in first, but I came in second and third. They picked 2 of them. I was like, wow, that's crazy. They picked 2 out of all of these photos that were submitted. And then I did a show where I had some framed and hung them in this coffee shop in New York, and those all sold. And then I started shooting for like insurance companies, like, you know, business, like headshots of CEOs giving speeches, which is not exciting, but that one photo shoot paid more than I made in a month playing drums, you know? So I was like, man, this is kind of easy money. You know, I don't have to go on tour. I can go shoot for 2 hours and I'm done. And as soon as I started, I had business cards, Carter McLean Photography, I was shooting weddings, which is not fun, but it pays really well. And as soon as I got that rolling, it was like, I think I'm going to do this. Lion King called and said, hey, will you take over the book? And I was just like, oh man. I was like, I can't say no to that. It's like an easy dream gig, you know? And that was 13 years ago I took over. So I've been playing there for 21 years, which is crazy because I subbed for a long time. But yeah, it kind of like, there was a lot of things pointing me to go back to playing music, and it kind of reeled me back in. And I've had a couple moments like that in my life that were like, okay, this is what you should be doing. But you know, any job is going to be hard. It's just life. Anything, even if you're good at it, you're going to hit bumps and you're going to have ups and downs. And that's why I try not to take any of the like social media stuff too seriously, because at the end of the day, that's not paying my bills. You know what I mean? Like, I have a job that's what covers the bills, you know? All the other stuff you can get wrapped up in, oh, why did I post this photo and nobody liked it? Or I didn't get enough comments on it. It's like, who cares? You know, that doesn't really matter. And, you know, even friends will be like, hey, did you see what so-and-so said about you? It's just like, man, if that person wants to talk to me, they can come to my house and talk to me. You know what I mean? Everything else is irrelevant. So, but yeah, I'm glad I came back to play. You know, I would have always played drums. That's no question. I'll always play. It's just a matter of how you want it to fit in your life. You know, does that want to be your main job for your money? And if it does, you might have to play a lot of gigs that you don't like playing at all. You know, I'm lucky that I have a gig that I've got totally memorized. I can go in there on kind of autopilot and play it no problem. But it also allows me to come here and do clinics like this and play with other people and teach if I want to do that. Like, I'm taking a little break for a year of private students. I'm just doing like a reset. I got kind of burnt out doing the one-on-one thing. So I'm going to take a year off, a little over a year, and then I'll start teaching privately again in 2024. But I told people I have a website I created during the pandemic that's like 10 hours of like video footage, like an hour on how I tune. I thought of every question everybody's always asked me, like, what comes up the most? So I was like, tuning, groove, miking drums, like engineering your drum sound and like mixing it with a record. So I go through it so you can see my screen. And these are the drums I recorded with Charlie. This is how I did it. Hand exercises, Broadway drumming, like a whole bunch of stuff. So I just said, look, if I'm not teaching for the next year and you want to study with me, check out these courses. It's the price of 2-hour lessons with me, and you get 10 hours. You know, so I think it's a really good deal, and it's something you can watch forever. It's not like a membership. It's like you pay for it, that's your stuff forever. So just having, you know, other options for people, I think, is important. And like knowing how to use video cameras, knowing how to engineer your drums and make them sound good, and like do lighting. And, you know, now everybody has to be all of those things. You have to be a drummer, an engineer, a videographer, a photographer, an Instagram blog. You know, you have to have a blog. I mean, there's just like so much stuff you have to do now. And there's nobody teaching you really how to do it. You just got to go on YouTube or study with someone that knows what they're doing, or get with a friend and say, how do you get your camera to look like this? You know, it's a never ending thing. So it's a lot.
Fun challenge though.
Yeah, it's a big challenge. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, how have you felt coming back to Europe? Because that's when the love for photography started for you. Have you been taking some photos around somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like subconscious. Like I was looking out of our hotel. I posted one yesterday on Instagram of it's just on the stories. And the funny thing about my Instagram account, when I first started it, I was really in the photography thing. So it was all like landscape photography, still black and white photography. There was no drumming at all. And you couldn't even do video then. It was just photos. And then I posted some drum photos and people really liked those. And then it just started that you could do like a 15-second clip. And this was right when I moved out to our house so I could set up drums. And I remember just posting a groove or something, and that people were like, oh my God, this is amazing. It was like 100 times more impact than like a still photograph. I was like, oh, people like the drum thing, okay. So I started posting more drum stuff, and then my account went from like 300 followers to like, I don't know, like 8,000 like in a week or something. I was like, oh, okay, so it's drums. People just want to see drums. Okay, got it. And it's still true today. I joke around, I'll post a picture of my dog, and people are like, boo, don't want to see your dog.
Good or bad.
And I'm like, it almost makes me want to just post pictures of my dog.
Right.
You know, it's like, how many snare drum photos do you need? You know, it's like, but that's what people want to see. But yeah, I'm constantly, and it's always on my phone, unfortunately, because I don't want to walk around with a camera. Even like the Fuji 100F that I have, it's pretty small. But when you're out all day and you don't know where you're going to end up and you're just around, I don't love having a camera. But if I have like, we're going to San Sebastian tomorrow.
Nice.
I kind of wish I had a camera just because I'm not going to be teaching. I'm not going to be dealing with drums or anything. Just to walk around and get some really good shots, like, you know. But the phone is kind of amazing. I hate to say it, but like these phones have pretty amazing cameras, and you can edit stuff. I use this app called Snapseed that I think a lot of people use, and that's all I do. It takes 2 seconds. You can adjust it. You can do the contrast. You can, you know, do whatever you need, and it looks good. So I just feel like it's another creative thing like music. It's like, do you have an eye or an ear for it? You know, and if you have an eye for it, it's hard to ignore like, oh, that's a great photo, to not just snap it and edit it later, you know? So I'm just trying to be creative, I guess. You know, that's, I feel like why I'm here, you know? Like, I don't think I would do well like programming something at a computer all day. That's not, I don't think that's why I'm here.
Like you have a creative energy that comes and goes, so is it just
100%. The fall, kind of now, is when I always start writing music. It's like, I think it's because you start to be inside more, but there's also something about like, you know, season is changing. It's, you know, everything's kind of dying from the summer, and it's like almost like a rebirth in the spring. So like fall, winter, I'll probably end up writing a new record this winter. I don't know what it'll be, but that's usually what happens. I'll go down and play, you know, guitar in the morning and go, oh, that's a nice tune. Like this last record I did, my wife heard a lot of the guitar, just the guitar, like simple guitar parts for a long time. And then when I, you know, put string arrangements and bassoon or whatever around it and then played her that, she's like, oh, wow, this is a whole, I see what you were hearing now. And it's like a whole different thing. But in my head, I always hear all of that, but I can only play one instrument at a time. So it's nice when you sit with a simple melody or simple guitar part and you're like, oh, this would sound amazing with like an upright piano in the distance and maybe like just a floor tom or something and then some string, you know, just arranging music. It's like photos. It's the same thing. It's like editing a photograph. Like when you look at mixing music and editing photography, it's the same thing.
Same kind of preset.
It's like high end, low end, mid range. Like it's all similar. Saturation. It's like very similar vocabulary too. So I don't know. I guess I like creating stuff.
You mentioned in an interview that at some point you had to write a letter to yourself from the past to the future.
Oh, wow. That's a deep dive. Yeah.
So
sixth grade.
If you had to do it again for your 60-year-old self,
wow. That's a really good question. That's maybe the best question.
I'll play you the interview.
That might be the best question I've ever, that's really good. So if I wrote one today for like me when I turned 60, oh man, I honestly feel really lucky for where I am at. I mean, I feel like I have a very good life. I really kind of knock on wood every day, just between my family, my wife, and just our situation in general. I feel if I can just maintain kind of what we're doing, I'll be very, very happy. You know, I'm very lucky. You know, not everybody gets to fly to Spain and just have a drum set waiting for them and play a solo for an hour. I mean, that's a pretty rare thing, and I don't take that for granted at all. You know, I always get excited for this kind of stuff. I don't know. I think it would just be to grow a little from what I'm doing, maybe play with a different artist or something in the future, but you can't. Just talking about this with Ronnie and this other drummer, you know, Brooks Wackerman. He's an
I've known the name, but I know him
incredible
personally.
drummer. His brother's also Chad Wackerman, who played with Zappa. I mean, their whole family is like insane. The three of us were all sitting around talking about just like, all right, so you're playing with the Killers for the last, whatever, 25 years and playing MSG every night with Bruce, Bruce Springsteen sat in with them last night. Like, where do you want to go? And he's just like, man, he's like, I don't know. Like, you never know who you're going to run into or what path is going to just go boop. I never thought I'd be playing a Broadway show, let alone Lion King, ever when I was growing up. It was like Sting, Peter Gabriel, Paul Simon. Mm-hmm. Those were my three. And now I know who's playing. A friend of mine's playing with Sting, Zach, who's amazing. I got very close to playing with Peter Gabriel. I did a record with his daughter, Melanie, when I first moved to New York. And I got to meet Peter, and he was like, I really liked your drumming on her record. And I was just like, oh my God. And I got to meet Manu, who's like one of my favorite drummers. And so I've come very close. And another really good buddy of mine, Jim Oblon, played drums after Gad left with Paul Simon for 10 years. And Jim's like one of the nastiest guitar players. We did a gig in Nashville, just the trio, guitar, bass, and drums. Another thing, we had never met, we had never played. I listened to some of his tunes, and we went in and just played, and it was amazing, really fun. I think just being open and like prepared, if Jim Oblon was like, hey, let's do a tour for a month, great. I'd be so excited to do that. Or I know Charlie and I are going to try to get together this fall or winter and do a little tour on the East Coast. I might do a clinic tour on the West Coast this winter just to get out and mix it up. But, just being open and just not saying, oh, I don't do that, You never know,
You told yourself, come on, man, you're still doing The Lion King?
Yeah, I was going through that really heavy about 4 or 5 months ago. I was going to quit.
Were you?
I've reached a point where I was just like, I've played over 6,000 shows of the exact same thing.
It never changed.
I mean, they've arranged things once every 15 years. They'll change one little thing, but it's basically the same exact thing every night. Same room, same everything. So it will drive you a little crazy. But I came around and said, and that was the first time in 21 years I was like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. But I came around and I was just like, this is a great situation. I just need to maybe think about pushing myself to go outside of this, because you can take off and do other things. So it's just a comfortable gig. It's just easy to get lulled into like, oh, this is easy. It pays well. I have a pension. I get health care. Like, it's a really good situation. And then you look at what, some tours pay and you're like, I would lose money. I'd be traveling every day. I'd be away from my wife and my dog and my house, and just stay home, But for certain people, I would definitely want to go out and explore more. But it is a good gig. But yeah, I got burnt pretty hard for a while. But I think I've come full circle, let's say. Not the circle of life, but full circle. And I'm cool for now, Yeah. Yeah, that would be fun. If Zach can't make the gig, I'll show up and do my best,
What do you value now that you perhaps didn't value, say, 5 years ago? Is there anything that has changed?
Yeah, I think I value just like quiet time. I know that sounds like an old man answer or something, but
it happens.
I really do just value like going for a walk with my wife and my dog and just like not having an agenda, Like I'm really looking forward to the rest of this trip as well, because it's like, we have no agenda in San Sebastian other than a few reservations at a restaurant. And I don't want to look at a tourist map. I just want to go walk, That to me is the most fun way to kind of figure out a city or a town. And just walking around here has been amazing. There's so many old buildings and just doorways that are like, oh, that looks like it's a 1,000-year-old door, It's crazy. Just simple little moments, nothing like, oh, it has to be like fireworks and crazy stuff. Just simple, quiet things I really tend to like. And I find that in my drumming and in photography, it might be a very simple image, but the way it's composed might be really special, So stuff like that I really value more, and less sparkly kind of stuff. I kind of don't care anymore about that, if that makes sense. I guess.
Yeah, the little moments you can replicate them sort of like more often, whereas the big moments you cannot rely your happiness on that.
Yeah, because they're rare.
Exactly.
And it's almost like I appreciate the simplicity of things. I think that's just, and I think with most musicians, their personality comes out in how they play. You can kind of learn a lot by just hearing them and watching them, you know? Like I feel like, obviously I never got to meet Miles Davis, but like, I feel like I kind of knew who that guy was from all the different kind of music he played. And same thing, like when I got to know, I was a fan of Charlie Hunter's before I ever met him. And then it kind of made sense when I met him, his personality, how it kind of comes out through his playing. You know, it's like a very super intellectual, but super grooving thing that's happening. And Charlie's like one of the smartest people I've ever met. Like we've sat in cars for 10-hour drives, and I got out of the car after that drive like a much more intelligent human being just from listening to him talk about stuff, because he's read so many books and he's just constantly learning. He can play drum set better than most of my students. And he's like, oh, I just play around with it, you know. But he can pick up instruments really quickly. Like Pandero, he's an amazing Pandero player, you know. Oh my God. And he's like trying to show me like it's like, you know, writing my name. He's like, oh, it's simple. Just do this and then you hold it. And I could barely even hold it. And it takes a lot of strength in your left arm to get all of those motions. It's a very awkward instrument. But he picks it up and he sounds like a drum set. I mean, it's incredible. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I keep talking in circles.
Circle life. We are reaching the end of the interview, and I wanted to bring something that is more active for the audience, so they not just listen, but they get to have something to do after we talk. So,
okay.
I asked you before, do you have a challenge for the audience? So.
Yeah, sometimes I have them do, like, I'm going to explain some of these hand exercises just to get your hands, like, fluid. Maybe I'll have them either clap backbeats and see if they can hold it, or clap the accents that I'm going to sing out loud, like accents in 5, 7. That gets to be tricky in an audience, though, because, like, if some people can do it and some people can't, it just sounds like people are just clapping, you know? I'll have to think of, now I'm going to have to ask them to do something. Right. So I got to think of what that'll be. But it'll be something having to do with accents within a pattern, and see if everybody, even if it's just 5, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, da, da. But if I just go out and go, people just think it's 4, right? But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. And that's what's interesting. Like sometimes I'll go out and play D, 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 D. And usually default, they think 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1 and 2. But this could be triplets. If you just have a pulse, you have no idea what it's relating to. It could be accents of 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, you know. So again, it's like you have to have 2 things. Like if you have a guy in a white jumpsuit in front of a white wall, you're not gonna see him. You know. But if you have a white jumpsuit against a green wall, it sticks out like crazy. So that's a lot of stuff that I think about when I'm playing drums too. Like especially with rhythms, like how they interact. Because if you just have one pulse, you have no idea what it's relating to, you know. So maybe I'll do something like that for the audience. I got to pick something that's kind of easy though, so they can all do it.
I'm doing a show in midday, and I'm not sure about it, but I want to play a click track, then mute it.
Oh,
and I'm in after.
That's very brave of you.
I know.
I'm terrible at that stuff. I did that with Mike Johnston at his camp. There was like a electronic kit that had like a pulse going, and if you were off by like a 64th,
it tells you.
Yeah, no, it just won't trigger the sound.
Right.
So he's like, play just boom, bop, boom, boom, bop, boom, and it was like boop, doop, dop. And I was like, I have horrible time. Like I can't play like a robot, which I was kind of like, thank God, you know.
Right.
You know, I mean, there's a point where like, yeah, you should have a good pocket and feel good playing with other people, and it's not moving around. But that's a really hard thing to play perfect, you know. When I track for someone, if there's a click, I'll look where my kicks and snares are. And if those are right on, great. The other stuff to me is why we're humans. It's like, that's the feel part of it. You know, I don't think perfect time really feels great a lot of the time. There's got to be a little sauce. You know what I mean? So, but if you can do the click thing, that's more power to you, man. That's hard.
I know I won't be able to. I've just got my phone with the click track. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, look, it's a never ending, it never ends. I'm sure my last day of my life, I'll probably be like still trying to figure something out, you know? But that's the beauty of the whole thing. It's just like, there's no end. Like, you know, when I talk to some of my favorite drummers that are, you know, like whoever, Vinny or Jim Keltner or Erskine or any of these guys that have played forever, they're always like, oh yeah, the show I played was garbage. I didn't play well at all. Like I want to do this better next. And I'm like, that was the most incredible show I've ever seen in my life. And they're going to find little things. So if you know that they're going through that, then it's like, you know, if you flub a rim shot, it's okay. You know, everything will be okay.
Unless you're playing an electric kick.
Yeah.
And it doesn't trigger.
And then you don't trigger because you're off by a 64th note or something. So, yeah.
I'm very lucky and grateful to have you here.
Oh, man. Thank you so much, man. This is cool. Those are great questions.
And thank you to the people over there. And it feels weird. I usually do this over Skype, so I'm way more nervous for this than for any gig I've ever played.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, we're just talking, man. You did great.
Thank you.
Great. It was fun.